Welcome to Managing Love Intelligently. I'm Jason.
And I'm Stephen Ng, licensed marriage and family therapist. And I'm talking to Jason, who is just a completely anonymous, law-abiding American male. We're just talking about relationships, you guys. I hope you can enjoy this.
That's right. And Steve comes with 35 years of experience in the business and lots of expertise. So it's going to be a good time. And today's episode is titled Seeking Understanding versus Seeking Forgiveness.
Wow. Okay. I shouldn't have shared that with you. This is hard because it really is a hard subject. So
yeah, it's something I heard you say. And then that's why sometimes I hear you say something and I'll make a note of it in my folder or in my notebook, and then I'll do an episode on it. And it's something that I don't really fully understand. So I figured that we could talk about it and learn more about it.
Well, the takeaway for me is I just really need to stop talking to you.
Yeah. You can't say anything. Otherwise I'll grab it and then I'll make you talk about it in front of a bunch of people.
Okay.
So yeah, before we kick off the conversation, if you have a question for Steve, you can visit stephening.com and fill out the contact form. At the end of each episode, Steve will answer a listener question. So stay tuned for that. And if the podcast helps you live a happier life, please help spread that happiness by sharing it with your friends and family.
Yeah, in that regard, I've just been walking people through like how to sign up for it. I take them to stephening.com. There's a blue button just below my very handsome photograph. And he said jokingly, as only an older man can do. And then I walk them through the whole subscribe to my Substack, which will give you the podcast.
Yeah,
right there.
We're dropping it every 2 weeks now. So yeah, if you subscribe to the Substack, you get that sent to your email every 2 weeks.
And of course, there are many other hours that you could peruse, all of which I think are pretty useful. So you and a new subscriber could, on your own individually, go back and start at the beginning and just listen through, or pick it up wherever you find something interesting.
Yeah, I'd also say too, I had one friend who was dating a guy, and she was listening to the podcast, and then she recommended to him, and then they were listening to it together. So that's another thing. Like if you're new in a relationship, it's kind of a cool resource to both listen to and maybe talk about it afterwards and see, kind of explore some of the ideas and see if it's something they're interested in.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And I'll tell you why, not because I'm trying to be self-promoting as much as I just remember when I was younger and before I'd figured out a lot of these things, I really didn't know what to look for. And I didn't know what ideas needed to be discussed between two people considering partnership. And it was a long and painful process that listening to the podcast together or reading some of the articles or books that we've written, doing that as a couple is going to open up a conversation to where, well, for better or for worse, and I think it's always for better, you may decide, oh yeah, we can get closer. And I think we may also decide, or you may also decide, this is not going to work. This is just not sustainable. And that the language that you'll learn in the podcasts and the articles and books is going to help you both in that way, because there's nothing worse than partnering up with the wrong person. It's just unsustainable. And then you got to go through the breakup, and usually many months, if not years of your life are kind of going down the tubes. And, life's too short for that kind of nonsense. And so with Benjamin Franklin, I say an ounce of prevention, it's so much better than a pound of cure.
Yes, I agree. And I've had it the other way where, I'd go down. Well, I don't know. I didn't know what I was doing for pretty much 38 years of my life. And then when I started doing marketing stuff with you, learned a lot more. But even then, it's like, it's hearing the stuff over and over and over again and getting it into my head. And another thing I'd say about listening to it as a couple, it's like you're almost, and when you talk about it after, you kind of have both of your minds combined to kind of explore some stuff, because your partner may pick up something that you missed, or you may pick up something your partner missed. And then it just seems like it's two heads are better than one sort of situation.
I'm glad you said that about listening to things over and over, listening to the ideas over and over, because I know a lot of our podcasts overlap and my articles overlap. And I had a client, a wonderful young woman who is seeking some help with her partner. And she said, I just wish you could just like pour all this information into my head. And she's a very bright woman, and she could probably handle that. If I just assigned 300 pages of reading by the end of next week, she'd probably do that. The problem with that for all of us is that it's just merely cognitive. So I've got the ideas floating around in my gray matter, but I haven't integrated them at all into my behavior, and my feelings still aren't resolved. It's a little bit like, going through some sort of trauma and you've got an intact memory, but you haven't really integrated the feelings, because some of these ideas are very threatening and we're not even aware of how threatening they are, or we're not even aware of how to integrate them behaviorally into our lives. So I think repetition does help. And please let me know if you find it terribly boring, because that's the last thing I want to do for anybody. But it is, the podcasts and all the other stuff are really an illustration of how everything is connected to everything else. If you've done enough mushrooms, that we're all interconnected in some sort of quantum manner. And I really believe in that. And I think all these ideas come together really as a body of knowledge. And it's a different way of life. So that's that.
Yeah, it's a good pitch for it.
Okay.
Cool. And yeah, even like me too, it's like you get it, you get the information, then you put it into practice. That helps you integrate it as well. It's like, because hearing the thing is one thing. And I think people get so much information these days about so many things. And that's why I like this, because it is kind of complicated, but it's more the complexity. The lessons are, teachings are simple, but the complication is in working through everything that you think is correct in relationships or how you should be and that sort of thing.
I think the metaphor that occurs to me as I listen to you is that it's a little bit like learning how to dance by reading a book.
Yeah.
Because all of these ideas, yes, it's true, a lot of them are really internalized and relate to your own personal individual system of belief. Or belief system is a better way to say that. But a lot of it is really for a couple to see if they can execute these moves in real time, or failing that, can they learn to do that over time? And I think it's really challenging for people to do that. I think it's hard. So, but it's so much easier than trying to fix a broken relationship. So I think whether it's difficult or easy for you, it's going to be so much easier than partnering with the wrong individual, moving in together, perhaps getting married, and then, figuring out a year or two later that, I think I made a mistake. Yeah. And so, I'd encourage everybody to just kind of relax and listen to these things, and also feel free to question. I get questioned and cross-examined by my clients all the time. And I think that's the test of any really good system of thinking is, how's it working in real life? How does it work? How does it bear up under close examination? And is the author of these ideas, yours truly, that is, can he comfortably explain the answers to my questions? So,
yeah, I'd mention one other thing too, really quick. And we're going to get to the topic. And we got more than enough time. But also, I realize sometimes the information, like you always say, what's the rush? That's part of the whole pitch. I feel like a lot of people are in a rush. And I feel like a lot of people are so driven by this has been my experience from a recent situation as well, which would be too long to get into, but it's like.
But it was a romantic situation.
A romantic situation. And I was hesitant about going forward because the person had kids, and that was something that I was kind of struggling with. I always made it known. And then I eventually it took me some time to even get to the point where I could try it. And I feel like I got to that point finally, but by that point she was in another relationship and now she's off, gone. And now it's pretty much over. But it was like that sort of thing, that rush.
So this, it's an ugly word, but I think it's worthy of being said. All of us experience what it's like to be emotionally needy. And I don't mean that we don't all have needs as human beings, but when we talk about being needy, it's the predominance of that adjective that comes forward and starts defining us, instead of the guy who's living life calmly or even joyfully. That man could be the same man at a different time in his life. He presents really differently to others when he's dating. And when I say, what's the rush? The needy person is saying, well, damn. That's like, I'm dying here.
And so are the friends too. I would say, I would imagine the friends of that person.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
What are you waiting for?
Everybody picks up on it.
If he doesn't take you, one girl told my friend, if he's not into you for 6 weeks, get rid of him. If he doesn't commit after 6 weeks,
within 6 weeks,
he's gone.
Yeah. And let me just say for the record, that is insane because you cannot get to know anybody within 6 weeks in terms of an adequate knowledge of who they are as a human being.
Yeah.
None of us are that simple.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're dating the way normal people date, it would be like once or twice a week, maybe 3 times a week. I see this person. Maybe we have 2 or 3 phone calls in there, but I also have to go to work. I also have other relationships called friends and family that require my taking care of them, my nurturing those relationships. And at best, those frequent listeners will remember I truly say at best, the most any of us can hope for is to be a wonderful part of that person's otherwise wonderful life. We're not their life. We're a part of their life.
Yeah.
The romantic part. And hopefully the incredibly good-looking part, the passionate part, the sexual part. But we're just a part of it. We're not everything.
Yeah.
And that's just not a sustainable model. So any man or woman who's pressuring any of us for a commitment within such a short window it's ridiculous. And it's so short that even doubling it and saying, oh, well, 3 months. Wouldn't 3 months be enough? No, 3 months is not enough.
What do you think is enough?
Well, I've surveyed all my clients who come to my office and they've said, I've asked them specifically, can you name the one trait your most recent ex had that was proved to be a deal breaker? And they would pretty easily.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, and how long elapsed in your failed relationship between the time you fell in love and the time you made a commitment, either to date exclusively or to move in or to even get engaged or even get married? And the average number that came up was 3 months.
Okay.
They all said within 3 months. And then a follow-up question, and how long would it have taken you had you merely dated before you would have been made aware of this defect that was a deal breaker ultimately in the relationship? And the average answer was 1 to 2 years.
Okay.
If they had simply slowed that roll and taken their time, and the other advantage here is savoring the pleasure of enjoying a dating relationship and enjoying the excitement of planning things together, and whether it's just a simple meal at one another's residence or going out for lunch or going on a long walk. I mean, it doesn't have to cost an arm and a leg, but it's just spending time together and looking forward to getting to know them better.
Yeah.
So I just would urge anybody listening to this to reject not only the impulse, but also all of the messaging in our society, like in the latest TV shows and How to Seduce Women, How to Get a Man kind of books. There are plenty of those. They're all useless. So don't waste your money Just examine them at the bookstore and then put them back on the shelf and walk away. So I guess we should get to this.
Yeah,
topic.
There's so much more. I mean, yeah. And then you have to be, I think for you, if you're really doing this stuff, like you have to be willing, if the person can't hang out and just go slow with you, you got to let them go, I guess.
Yeah. And going slow doesn't mean, oh my God, how boring this is. If it's boring, he's obviously, or she's obviously not the right person for you.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about perhaps spending a lifetime together.
Mm-hmm.
So if they have no game, if conversation with them is boring, if looking forward to spending more time in their company is disheartening, then yeah, it's time to move on. But the great thing is you haven't made a commitment. So it's just a matter of maybe not returning their phone calls or letting them know you already made plans for this weekend, or maybe a more straightforward manner would be to simply say, I figured out I'm not the right person for you.
Yeah.
I need to move on. Thanks. It's been great getting to know you. Talk to you later. And, whether that's to send out as an email, a text, or a Dear John letter, or whatever it is, it's just so much easier to break up when you're not really an item and you don't have a commitment. It's just easy to move on.
Yeah. It still has some pain and sadness associated with it.
A mild disappointment, I would say, almost like at the high school level, right? It's not Splendor in the Grass with Natalie Wood. It's not like you had your heart set on being together forever with this person and you'd already mapped it all out and you were going to have babies together and all of that. You dated a few times. So in 6 weeks, 12 weeks, half a year, you dated enough. But we're not talking about a pretty deep level of commitment. We're talking about no commitment.
Yeah. But what if you I went like a year and a half with this girl or so, say, and then it was on and off and we were dating other people. And then it's like the longevity of that felt like it was like we were getting deeper, but we also didn't take it to that exclusive level, which I think that makes it harder. Then moving in makes it even harder. Then getting married makes it even harder.
Well, it's going to make it kind of more like a therapy session, but I would have to ask what kept you from committing?
Well, the kids, like I said.
Oh, well, then, yeah. And now I think you're clearer than ever.
Yeah.
I am not ready for somebody else's kids.
Yeah.
I may never be ready for those, but I'm certainly not ready today. So just for today, as they say in Alcoholics Anonymous, just for today, I could date a woman with kids. I could have fun with a woman with kids.
Yeah.
Maybe knock boots with a woman with kids. But it's not something that is really sustainable.
Yeah.
And you didn't know that going into it.
Exactly. But I did feel like I got to the point where I could try it. Because one thing you said to me, because they're boys, and you're like, well, you were a boy at one time.
Yeah.
It's like, oh.
It's not rocket science. It's pretty easy. And you're not their new dad.
Exactly.
You know, you're the mom's boyfriend and maybe someday the mom's husband.
Yeah.
But obviously they have a dad.
Yeah.
And that dad may be divorced from the mom, or he may be AWOL somewhere in the Foreign Legion. French Foreign Legion, that is, or he may even be dead because perhaps she's a widow. But in any case, you're still not their father.
Yeah.
And she's got to be the one who takes the risk of being the tough parent, the stern parent when needed. And she's the one who has to enforce discipline. That's not your job.
Yeah.
So, and if you hate those little buggers, then you're not even supposed to be with her because of that, right?
Yeah, totally. Well, I didn't do it, but yeah, I learned a lot through the process. But I mean, even like through it, like it's coming at the very end of it. That's why I'm talking about it. And it was difficult, but it was also like with this, like doing this work and putting these practices into practice, I kind of, it's able to move forward with a little more ease. And also I didn't do that commitment, like you said, because if it was an exclusive relationship, it would have been harder. I think that the levels increase, like being exclusive is a higher level, moving in is another level, getting married is another level, having kids is another level. And it's like the pain levels just increase as you go up that scale.
Yeah, they sure do.
So, all right. So seeking understanding versus seeking forgiveness.
This is a new idea for me. And the idea, I want to be real frank with listeners, and I hope this isn't too icky, but I have a fair number of clients who've been arrested and or convicted of sexual crimes. And typically, we are far more comfortable forgiving murderers than we are forgiving people who've committed sex crimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, murderers even get their own podcasts.
That's true.
And when women want to marry them, a lot of
yeah, they get married while they're in prison, a lot of them. So that's weird too to me. But they also don't have their own registry unique to them. They're supposed to register as felons when they get out, but that's like if they do get arrested for something, they usually get charged with failure to register as a felon, and then that's the first charge that gets dropped in the plea negotiations. So I was reading Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, which is approximately 2,000 years old. And in book 2, in the first few pages of book 2, he makes the observation that we have a far easier time, and he believes rightfully so, we have a far easier time forgiving those who have committed sins that come out of anger, like beating up someone, robbing someone, killing someone. And then we do for those sins or crimes that come from desire, where somebody was just looking for pleasure or of some kind.
Yeah.
So he believes, Marcus Aurelius believes that that's right, because anger creates some sort of an insanity, and that you're not as responsible for your behavior. And I would say, yeah, that's absolutely true if you have that belief. But if you have the belief that, no, you're pretty much responsible for everything you say and everything you do, then that advantage washes away. And it's a typical thing we hear where the two worlds collide, as in domestic violence, where the one abusive person says to the other, well, I never would have, yelled at you, called you a name, or hit you. I never would have if you hadn't have. And then you fill in the blank with talked back to me, spent too much money, had an affair, whatever it was.
Yeah.
That my violence and my abuse is justified by what you did. This completely unjustifiable action. Well, I think this is one of many times where Marcus Aurelius is just flat out wrong, and he's kind of showing his age. And not that I don't like the guy, because I do. And I like Stoicism. I appreciate the philosophy. But on this, I think he's clearly wrong. And if we think it through, would you want to be in a relationship where if the person opposite you got angry enough, they really couldn't be held accountable for their behavior? Of course not. Nobody wants to encourage that way of thinking. And in fact, what we'd like to push is, can't we just be rational all the time? Because I know I can have my anger without my anger having me. I can have my fear without my fear having me. And now that's Stoicism.
Yeah.
So to me, we're all capable of that as human beings. And we need to be holding ourselves responsible for all of our behavior, no matter what it is we're feeling. So in any case, the modern age hasn't moved much beyond Marcus Aurelius. And my clients report quite often that one or more family members, sometimes the entire family, has disowned them because they looked at underage pornography, or the client tells me that he was convicted of, picked up in a sting operation where supposedly he was trying to solicit sex from an underage person. Maybe in the state of Nevada, it's particularly confusing because 16 is the age of consent, but 18 would be the age of consent for legalized prostitution. So a lot of people from out of the area and even long-term residents get those ages confused, and they think, no, this is okay because it's 16 is the age of consent. Well, it is unless money's involved, and then it becomes more protected as an activity. So in any case, these individuals, quite often, it's almost always the case, almost in 100% of my experience over the years, it's the first crime of their life. They are not career criminals. They are also not sexually deviant. And I don't want to go into a long-winded explanation for that, but an opportunistic or situational moment is not an indicator of a preference. So it'd be like somebody who's put in prison for decades, male or female, and they are heterosexual, but while in prison, they experience some sort of homosexual activity, or maybe a lot of homosexual activity, depending on what you mean by a lot. And that doesn't mean, oh, I guess now they're bisexual, or no, they're gay. No, it was a unique situation. It's highly situational. And very much, I think everybody out there listening to this could imagine themselves in a marriage that starts with all its hope and real joy. And then little by little, like the proverbial Chinese torture with the drop of water in the same part of your forehead over hours and days, you come to realize this relationship is not the loving relationship I thought it was. We're not even having sex anymore. My partner never says they love me. Or if they do say they love me, they never say it with feeling. And it's almost perfunctory, like, excuse me, when you're moving past someone in a hallway. So I think we can all easily imagine such a person after years of such a marriage being susceptible increasingly over time to the idea of having an affair with someone. And not that that's the idea, because it's never, oh, I think I might be more open to having an affair. No, the idea presents itself in the form of an attractive person who is presented to me, who seems to be very interested in me and very kind. And before you know it, I'm flirting with them. I'm enjoying their attention. And day by day goes by, and we're getting a little closer and a little closer. And we realize, oh my gosh, we have fallen in love. And now we're secretly exchanging kisses in the copy room, or after work. And nobody that I know, no normal person, starts off a marriage with the idea of, oh, I can't wait to have my first affair. And yet we often see Americans having affairs. More than half of Americans who are married do have affairs. And so what are we left to say? Are they all, half of Americans are therefore evil? No, I think more likely than not, we could say half of Americans who get, more than half who get married, simply don't get their needs met, and they lose their way without realizing that there are more honorable ways to proceed, that they could have simply left the relationship, simple or not. It may not have been easy, but that's very doable, rather than compromising your sense of honor, your code of ethics, your own morals, I think. But it's common, right? And we don't really judge people like that anymore, even though adultery, of course, used to be a crime, punishable by time in prison.
Yeah.
So adultery it's now a freebie. Everybody gets to commit adultery, and with no fault divorce, you go on your merry way, and no one gets hurt any further. But my clients who've been convicted of sex crimes have received the stigma of being labeled sex offenders, forced to register. They have residency restrictions, even though both registering and residency restrictions have been proven in one study after another to be utterly ineffectual in terms of preventing sex crimes.
Really quick, residency, you mean like some states or counties won't allow them to live there?
They won't allow them to live in certain neighborhoods.
Oh, I see.
Like if 2,000 feet away, there's a daycare.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Okay. Or, 1,000 feet away, there's a school. They won't let them live in that particular residence.
Because that logic says that they're so rabid for this desire that it's overflowing. They're going to reenact.
Yeah, it's like dangling a fresh brownie right out of the oven in front of somebody with an eating disorder. And
that's just the normal brownie liking. I would eat that brownie.
Well, and maybe it's partly that way of thinking that, well, if I would do it, but for the vast majority of people arrested, whether they're with somebody underage or not, it's not really because, thank goodness, okay, thank our stars above, that the a vast majority of people arrested for such crimes are not pedophiles. They're not interested in children. And it's confusing because therapists use the word child to describe someone who's prepubescent, and that's what pedophilia refers to. But somebody past puberty, past the age of puberty, is an adolescent, and by definition is no longer part of the definition of pedophilia. So even if he, let's say your husband or ex-husband has an affair, like a teacher having an affair with a student who's 17 or 16, that may be a violation of state law wherever it is you live, but it's not an indicator that he's a pedophile. So,
but he is not managing his love intelligently.
Correctamundo. So, this podcast session, though, is dedicated to the idea of the aftermath of such an experience, where the individuals who are socially stigmatized in this way find there is no forgiveness for them. And I, from a purely human point of view, I understand the dynamics, but I think the model is essentially a religious one. And and even, what's the name of one of those speakers you've heard of, the guy from Canada, the psychologist?
Jordan Peterson.
Jordan Peterson recently was opining on the importance of forgiveness, how important it is that we forgive one another. And although I have a lot of respect for him, I think he's so wrong on this. And I think he's blinded by his own religious experiences, because forgiveness is, at the end of the day, a feeling. And you can sit in church and hear a sermon on the importance of forgiveness and realizing, yes, you do have something against someone and you've never really forgiven them. And you can, because you've been guilt-tripped now, try to force yourself to forgive them. You may even convince yourself, I have forgiven them. I was sitting in church and I heard the word of the Lord and I made a decision to forgive them. Okay. But then that person does one more thing, or you're later in your life, perhaps only days later, thinking of some other thing that they did that you'd forgotten about, or remembering it, just how much it hurt you. And all of a sudden you're grinding again in this cycle of resentment. And the truth is, you haven't forgiven them. And the reason you haven't forgiven them is quite human, actually, because you have no control over your feelings. None of us can make ourselves fall in love with someone we, quote, should, end quote, love. It doesn't matter if he or she is good, would be really good for us or not. And nor can we stop loving someone we really do love and care about, even if they're behaving badly, like a child of our own, for example. We don't stop loving our children because they were mischievous. We may be angry, but our anger coexists or is part of an ambivalent feeling about this individual, but it's not as though we stop loving them. So we can love somebody and not be able to make ourselves hate them. And we can hate somebody, which I know hate is a dirty word for some people, but I looked it up and I assure you it just means to intensely dislike someone. Like I'm sure my ex-wife still feels about me. And
still?
Probably. And so but it just, that is the definition of hate. And I don't think she could ever make herself, by an act of her will, love me again. Or love me ever, because I'm not sure she ever did love me. So, the upshot of this is, what I'm saying is the model of forgiveness is really not a thing.
Oh, that's a big concept that you're dropping.
Yeah. I mean, we can come to forgive people, but it's like all our other feelings, it happens in its own time. Like falling in love happens in its own time. You, Jason, might know a woman for 5 years, and then one day Cupid, sinks an arrow into your heart, and you realize you've never really noticed how really wonderful she is and how amazing, and you find yourself falling in love.
Yeah.
And in a similar way, I think people fall out of love. And when they realize, oh, they're not who I thought they were. So forgiveness is a feeling. It is not a matter of gritting your teeth and just being obedient to the word of the Lord. And for those of us who aren't religious, I think the model comes down to us via religion. And the idea is, to me, that, seeking forgiveness would be a good thing, because holding on to a resentment really just is exhausting over time. Mm-hmm. But it's a matter of time, and it's not within our control.
Yeah.
And it's a matter of maturing and letting go of things and maybe spiritually growing, but it is not something that I can do on command, like a dog sitting or fetching or something like that. I've got to be able to do it in the human way. So it comes with usually a sin. There's been some wrongdoing, some wrong was done to me, for example. And now I'm resentful, I'm angry, and I have this requirement set on me to forgive. And if I withhold forgiveness, I have something I can hold over the other person. I've never forgiven you for such and such. Mm-hmm. And it's somehow the relationship can never really go forward, right? If I don't forgive. And I know that a lot of us have meant well, including me, when I've said to others, well, when all is said and done, you have to forgive yourself, for our own sins and trespasses, the things we've done wrong.
Yeah, it's a huge thing in religion and just everything, forgiveness.
Yeah, it's in our culture. And what I'm saying is it's all a useless game.
Yeah.
And instead, I want to offer this. And it's in that category of rational thinking where I believe reason over revelation. I think reason is going to help us here. My experience has been that when I come to understand myself, then all the tension that I associate with resentment and unforgiveness, it all dissipates. Mm. For example, when I was 6 years of age, I was put in charge of taking care of my little brother. And wouldn't that have been amazing if I, as a 6-year-old, had been mature enough, loving enough, really superhuman enough to be a great caregiver? Well, I wasn't a great caregiver. And for the next 10 years, my poor, unfortunate brother, who someday I hope will get out of the institution. Okay, that's a joke. He never was in an institution. But for 10 years, I made his life pretty miserable. I was physically abusive, emotionally abusive, verbally abusive. And what it did for me as a 6-year-old, my behavior of being so controlling, it gave me an illusion of control in a family where I felt utterly out of control. My mom was a single parent. She was working full time to support the family. The year was 1960 when we started all of this. And it was just awful. It was just awful for my little brother, but it was no picnic for me either. And somewhere almost exactly at my 16th birthday, my brain finally developed enough that I recoiled in horror at my own behavior. I couldn't believe how really awful I had been to my own brother.
It just came to you out of nowhere?
Out of nowhere. And I apologized to him repeatedly. And I mean, over years, I apologized multiple times, and I carried that guilt for about 20 years. I could not forgive myself. And I would just bow my head in shame and embarrassment over my behavior every time the subject would come up. And I would talk about it occasionally, at an Al-Anon meeting or a church meeting or with my family. But it was just, and actually that was part of my passion that I developed for having an abuse-free life, because I could see that it was so utterly destructive and utterly unhelpful. It was really, truly a self-defeating behavior in terms of making family be normal and loving and successful. So then somewhere in my late 30s, I think about 20 years after I'd been holding on to this guilt and shame, I realized, wait a minute. I was only 6 years old. I shouldn't have been put in a position of responsibility over caregiving a younger child or any child. That was a terrible idea. Who does that? And then I came to realize, wait a minute, that was at least neglect brought about by circumstances of my mother being a single parent. And also perhaps even so far as calling that a form of abuse. But whatever it was beyond my ability to cope. And the adults in charge of me, that was sort of their responsibility to figure that out. And if they couldn't figure it out, to take responsibility for it. We don't know what else to do. We have no other choice, but we have to let you be responsible. Try not to be an abusive little jerk, and try to learn how to be kind and loving. And, I got a lot of admonitions like, you're bad, you're being a bad big brother, that kind of thing. But I never received any instruction. It's a lot like being told, don't masturbate to a 13-year-old, but never teaching him the answer to, okay, well, how should I handle my sexuality? Mm-hmm. What am I supposed to do with all these feelings and urges?
Pray it away.
These thoughts. Yeah, maybe. Or just lots of cold showers, or spend more time with your Boy Scout troop leader. I don't know, what the answer would be, but it has to be something more than just don't do it.
Yeah. And you also, to your situation, you didn't have that. You said you didn't have the control, that you felt out of control in your life. So you were trying to seek control through the abuse. Like, you couldn't know that at 6 years old.
Yeah. Cognitively, I certainly wasn't up to any of that. I had no awareness or understanding.
So by that point, it's just like you're like unconscious of that you've been doing it.
Unconscious, ignorant, utterly unformed. I'm still that little bit of protoplasm that's going through the metamorphosis of becoming a human being. And, being born is a big step, in terms of the chrysalis of the mother's womb opening up and the butterfly coming out. And that's a big step. But so is puberty. And the process of growth and maturation it takes some real time for a boy of 12 or 13 to come to realize some sort of moral thinking that goes beyond merely following the rules. Mm. So at around 36, I had this incredible awareness. It was almost like I was just thunderstruck with the realization that I'd been carrying around all this guilt. Because when I realized how unready I was and how truly not right it was to put me in that position, and admittedly, I had done many bad things. I was still responsible for doing those bad things, but I came to understand how I came to be that guy who did those bad things from 6 to 8 to 12 to 13, 14, 15, all the way up to 16. And I felt the burden slide off of me in a similar feeling to the language religious people use when they decide to convert. And I gave my heart to the Lord, and the burden of my sins fell away. And I understand the thinking there, because you've done something wrong and now you need atonement for your sin, and you have to have Jesus to make propitiation for your sins. Or, in Judaism, they have their own doctrines around that, and the same with Islam, and the same really with every religion there is. And I think for me, it was more of a humanist discipline of seeking understanding, and the understanding is to be found in the narrative of my life. How did I come to be so impaired that I behaved in this god-awful way? Well, let's leave God out of it altogether. How did I come to behave in this truly awful way? And then when we understand that, when we have true understanding to the point where we're going, now I see it. The same is true of us as parents when we look at our children's behavior and we notice that our child is screaming and yelling or caterwauling, taking on all kinds of bad behavior. Oh, why? Because it's time for bed. They're exhausted. Or, they haven't been fed and it's time for them to eat. And we adults, don't stick your nose up in the air, adults. We often behave badly for the same exact reasons. It's too late in the day to start an argument. It's too late and we haven't had supper yet and we're irritable because we haven't eaten. So there are lots of very humbling explanations out there for our bad behaviors, and some of them are more complicated. If you were raised in a family that somebody, old friend of mine who's now long gone, used to say, "I yell because I care."
Yeah.
Because in his family, everybody yelled at everybody. Mm-hmm. That's how he was raised.
Yeah.
And so when he yelled, if he didn't yell, that would mean he wasn't upset. And if he wasn't upset, that meant he didn't care about you and that he didn't love you. And so yelling was a part of the package. Mm-hmm. And it was inescapable. And it was that thinking that had him yelling for years at different girlfriends, his own children, and ultimately the two women that he ended up marrying over his lifetime. So
I love you.
Don't you understand how much I love you? And if she doesn't understand, it's like the ugly American. You just have to yell louder.
Yeah.
Yell that truth louder. So, for those of us who are not religious, I just, I think people who are religious may be a little bit trapped into the, continuing to follow along in the doctrine. But I would invite everybody out there to just try this. Try to figure out why the person, I misspoke, how the person you're so angry with, how they came to be the kind of person who would do what they did, how their sense of judgment is so uninformed. I still walk around to this day with a lot of resentment for the bullies I grew up with in my life, who traumatized me as a young boy, and who were very hurtful to me, both physically and emotionally. And I don't have enough data because I don't really know what kind of family that they were raised in. But I have every confidence in the world that they were raised in a family where they themselves were being treated badly.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Right. And so with that hypothesis in mind, if I actually did meet them today, I'm not an intimidated little child, I would actually want to confront them about, so how did you come to be such a bully? Uh-huh. What was that all about? And if they get mad and bully-ish, I just don't really care anymore about all that. I just really like to know, and I'd like to understand, because it would help me to put all those feelings to bed permanently. But, as a theory goes, human beings are pretty normal in the main. I know a lot of us are not, because I'm a therapist, and I know about a third of the general population is mentally ill at any one time. But I think we all do what we do for reasons. Alfred Adler, who is the father of all modern psychotherapy, he believed and promoted the idea that all behavior is goal-oriented. Goal-oriented because any organism that's condemned to random acts to get through its day would be an organism that would eventually fail to thrive. It would not be successful ultimately in getting enough food, enough protection, and would fail to reproduce. So, of course, even a worm, even a bacteria has goal-oriented behavior. And the question is, well, what is the goal? When a human being is mean or abusive or flat out cruel to another person, what is the goal of that behavior? Well, until we come to understand their narrative, we can never know.
Yeah.
And I'm not suggesting for a minute that a man or woman who's getting abused by their significant other stick around until they understand them. I don't really think that's necessary. I think you do get to leave just because the abuse is just that wrong and that disabling and that painful. I think you still get to leave. But in terms of our understanding ourselves, our children, and ultimately, of course, our own partners, everybody does what they do for a reason. And the goal would be to get together with a partner who's open to this kind of deep exploration into self, where the two of you, hand in hand, walk into the darker, swirling waters of the river of life and explore what's down there exactly. Is it rocky? Is it sandy? Are we going to be able to make the crossing together? or not. But to be able to do it together, I think is a requirement for any successful relationship.
Yeah.
So forgiveness actually kind of, if you think about it, it represses the drive to understanding.
Yeah.
Because I don't have to understand anymore. I have an obligation to forgive the other, whether it's a friend or a family member or a partner in life. I have the obligation to forgive regardless of understanding them. And if that's the virtue, if forgiveness is the virtue, and for my clients, I just, this is what I tell them. And anybody out there who knows somebody convicted of a sexual crime, you might want to share this. I just think it's like looking for a unicorn. Looking for forgiveness is something that's just simply not going to happen. People are either going to be understanding and kind, or they're part of a different tribe. And those people who feel that they are morally in a position of superiority, that they are able to judge you or me, those are really not the people you want in your life anyway. So if someone is going to judge me for my past failings, and just for the record, you should all know that when I was around that same age of 6, I did shoplift a 5-cent pack of gum, complete with baseball playing cards. So judge me as a thief for the rest of my life. But I think there were reasons even for that sin. We all do what we do for reasons, including the things that we know are morally wrong, the things that we know violate even our own moral code. We know this. We don't need the law to tell us this. We don't need another person to harp on it, nag us, preach at us, sermonize, or otherwise guilt trip us. We already know that it's wrong. The challenge is, having made that mistake in my life, like shoplifting that pack of bubble gum, I need to figure out how I can never do that again, because I don't feel good about myself as a shoplifter of anything, whether it's bubble gum or it's something far more expensive. It's property belonging to another person. And I want to understand myself, what was going on in my heart and in my thinking, for me to make that okay in that moment, and for me to give in to that sort of a thinking that I had to acquire this object in order to be feeling good about myself that day. And when I understand that, when I really understand that, it sets me free. And that's, another...
With forgiveness, you could just say, "Oh, Lord, forgive me. I have sinned. I stole this." Okay, you're forgiven. And then you're like, "Oh, I'm fresh. I get to go." Then you do it again. And then you can do it. I don't know. It seems like you could just...
Yes. And then the Lord set me free from my sins, and I went on with my life. So
I think I sinned again, and then I forgave, and
I had to confess, and the Lord was faithful to forgive me. And I'm not picking on Christianity. If anything, I'm picking on just religious thinking when it comes to this very natural human process. And I'm saying that forgiveness is not a thing, because who am I to hold something over your head? I am not a superior being. I am a fellow traveler, one as failed, if not even more failed than you. So the idea that I would hold it against you, that you had an affair in your marriage, or that you got a divorce, or that you didn't pay your child support, or that you did something far, far more wrong, like even a terrible act like murder, something really super serious. I have no doubt in my mind of the truth of that statement there, but for the grace of God, go I. I just don't think it's a God thing either. And I think all of us would be better off letting go of the whole forgiveness, even when someone tearfully asks, "Can you forgive me?" To say, "You know what, I don't even feel worthy of discussing that, because I'm not some person who could ever hold that over your head, but I do, or I don't yet understand you. And because I understand you, or because I don't understand you, I'm led to the following, conclusions, or the following feelings." And sometimes it's hard, right, to understand another person, because another adult in particular, because sometimes we're not all that transparent. We don't see ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you said, Steve, how did you come to do what you did to me and speaking rudely to me the other day? A, I might not even know that I was rude to you. B, perhaps I was, but it didn't even register on my mind. And if it did register, I might not have any insight into how I came to behave that way, as bad as that was. And as much as that violated my own moral code, I may not really understand it yet. Mm-hmm. And it may be something really embarrassing, like, I just woke up really tired and I just wasn't on my game. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I apologize. I think we still get to apologize, because we're expressing regret and remorse and contrition. I really don't want to do that. I'm committed to doing better. Please be patient with me. But I don't think it's about forgiveness anymore. So I tell my clients, forget it. If your mate isn't forgiving you, forget it. Just let go of it. They don't even have the right to hold that over you, because they're not God Almighty. Mm-hmm. So, if they want to hold that over your head for the rest of your life, maybe it's time to look for a new partner. And then I noticed that once we stop giving others this power over us, and beg for forgiveness because they haven't forgiven us yet, I think it's really okay to just let go. And when we let go, a lot of other people find that they don't hold it against us.
Yeah.
Because they're really not very good at being God any more than I was very good at being a parent at age 6. Mm-hmm. See what I did there?
I see what you did. Yeah.
I brought it all together.
I was waiting to see. I was like, we're coming up the time here, and I was psychically trying to send you the signal, and you got it. So
can that be a mic drop? Or
that's the mic drop. Yeah.
Okay. I thought maybe 20 more questions.
No, that's it. We're gonna wrap up there. So to end, we have a listener question. If you have a question for Steve, you could visit steveanding.com and fill out the contact form. This week's question is, hi, Steve. My girlfriend went on a trip with her 2 best friends from college, and they spend an entire day at a nude beach. She finally admitted she took her bathing suit off. Her friends did too, and they went swimming. I was fuming that she would take her clothes off in public. She says it was natural and that she felt free with nature, and that I am overreacting. It makes me sick to my stomach to think that she did this to me. Am I wrong to feel betrayed? Kind of in line with what we were talking about.
Yeah, really is. Well, I'm not really. I've met so many wonderful counselors who are patient and kind and really soft-spoken and gentle, and I'm just so not that guy. It's really hard for me not to say something rather biting, because.
Well, I was going to say that I was there at the beach.
Well, if we're talking about 2 adults, let's start over. Does she have the right to take off clothes at a public nude beach? Yes, she does. And in the negotiating of your contract of commitment, did she formally give up that right, along with numerous other rights, like the right to change her hairstyle, to listen to the kind of music she liked, the right to terminate an unwanted pregnancy, the right to choose her own friends for herself? How many rights did she give up? And where does all this thinking come from? I would argue that no woman in her right mind gives up any of these rights, and that any man who thinks otherwise really needs to have his head examined, because we're talking at its core, romance has to be a relationship based on equality. And that means women have to be given the opportunity to be equal to the men in their lives, and vice versa, just as well. Men need to be equal to women. So, and I know there are men and women who are not very good at this, and they have a lot of, restrictions and rules. But, the challenge is, if my partner is truly my equal, I just need to figure out if they're the right partner for me. But equality is a sine qua non. Mm-hmm. And I'm so glad I got to show off my Latin. But it's a without which not. If we don't have equality, you don't get to have an adult relationship because you're always marrying either a superior or an inferior. And you'll be lonely for the rest of that relationship. You married your boss, or you married your employee, you married your parent, or you married your child, whatever metaphor works for you psychologically, but you sure didn't marry a partner if your relationship isn't based on equality. And I'm kind of lit up about this because, I mean, this example happens to be about a woman, but I think the same would be true in reverse about a guy. And I think, well, I'm her boyfriend. I own the rights and the patents that come off of her nude figure. Mm-hmm. So that anyone who's going to enjoy her figure, I have to be the one who writes the permission to violate the copyright. Mm-hmm. And that just isn't true. She's not yours. You don't own her. And none of the women out there listening own their boyfriend. The question is, I think, one of control. And I don't think that we have that control. It has nothing to do with him. It has nothing to do with disrespecting him. She was with her girlfriends. She wanted to swim. And if anyone out there has not yet gone skinny dipping, i.e. swimming in the nude, you really owe it to yourself to try it. It's amazing. It feels fantastic. And I think that answers the question.
Great. All right. Well, thank you for that question, and thanks for the answer. And thank you all for listening. I thought that was actually really great. The seeking understanding versus seeking forgiveness. I feel like I've never heard that before expressed that way. We talk about forgiveness in such a universal way. And again, I was like, wow, we're all doing this and not really even understanding what forgiveness actually is.
Yeah, and I think it's inextricably linked to our religiosity, whether we are religious people or not. And I think it's just one more cord that binds us to irrational thinking based on revelation. Yeah. I don't think I even need to seek God's forgiveness. I think God understands exactly why I've done the bad things. Mm-hmm. And if he is, as they say, a loving person,
he's cool with it.
He doesn't hold this over me. In fact, it says that in 1 Corinthians 13, that love does not keep an account of wrongs. Hmm. So I think that's done. And instead, seeking true understanding, even why a friend might be doing something I find really irritating. To me, this is a big idea, not just because it's my idea, but just because I find it so liberating and so empowering.
Yeah.
Because there's a definite direction I can go as an individual where I have the control instead of waiting like some sort of Oliver Twist character with my empty bowl outstretched. May I please have more? And instead to just seek more understanding. Yeah. Good talking to you.
All right. Yeah, you too. All right. Catch y'all later.
Bye now.